The moment I realized this life wasn't mine came early in the morning. Not during a crisis. Not during a fight. Not when something fell apart. It came in silence. I woke up before the alarm, staring at the ceiling, listening to a house that felt unfamiliar, even though I had lived there for years. Everything around me was orderly, functional, carefully arranged. And suddenly I thought, how did I get here? Not in the practical sense. I knew the steps. The decisions. The logic behind each one. I could explain it all clearly if someone asked. That's what scared me. Every part of my life made sense on paper. And none of it felt like me. I had followed a path that looked reasonable from the outside. Each choice was justified. Each compromise felt temporary. Each yes seemed harmless at the time. I didn't choose this life all at once. I assembled it piece by piece. I chose what was expected instead of what was uncertain. I chose what sounded mature instead of what felt honest. I chose stability over curiosity, approval over desire, safety over meaning. And because nothing went wrong immediately, I kept choosing that way. I told myself I was being responsible. I told myself passion fades anyway. That dreams change. That everyone eventually settles into something ordinary. I believed that adulthood meant narrowing yourself until you fit inside the life that works. So I adapted. I learned how to want less. How to need quietly. How to convince myself that discomfort was normal. Over time, I stopped asking myself real questions. Not because I didn't care, but because the answers were inconvenient. When someone asked if I was happy, I said yes automatically. When they asked what I wanted next, I listed logical steps, not personal ones. I spoke fluently about plans. I was silent about longing. The strangest part was how calm everything felt. No drama. No chaos. No visible suffering. That calmness acted like proof that I was doing the right thing. But calm isn't the same as peace. Peace has depth. Calm can be empty. I noticed how rarely I felt excited, not nervous excitement, not stress, but that quiet sense of being drawn towards something. I noticed how my days blended together. How time passed without leaving memories behind. Nothing stood out. That's when the fear started. Because a life without contrast is easy to endure, and impossible to remember. I realized I was living on autopilot. Following routines that no longer required my presence. I could complete entire days without checking in with myself at all. And one morning, standing in front of the mirror, I felt a wave of panic I couldn't explain. I recognized my face. I didn't recognize the person behind it. It wasn't that I hated my life. That would have been easier. I simply didn't feel connected to it. As if I had moved into someone else's existence and forgotten when I agreed to stay. That's when the thought finally formed clearly. I built a life that looks right, but doesn't feel chosen. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. After that morning, something shifted. Not outwardly. Not visibly. I still went to work. Still followed the same routines. Still answered the same messages, smiled at the same moments, lived inside the same schedule. But inside, the quiet question wouldn't leave me alone. If I didn't choose this life, then who did? At first, I tried to reason my way out of it. I listed facts like evidence in a trial. I reminded myself that I wasn't trapped. That no one forced me. That every step I took had been my decision. And that was true. Which somehow made it worse. Because it meant I wasn't a victim of circumstances. I was a participant. I started replaying moments from the past, not the dramatic ones, but the small, forgettable decisions. The times I said yes because it was easier than explaining no. The times I stayed because leaving would have raised questions. The times I chose what was sensible over what felt alive. None of those choices felt fatal on their own. But together, they had built a life I barely recognized. That realization brought a strange kind of grief. Not grief for something I lost, but grief for something I never lived. I mourned the paths I dismissed without trying. The versions of myself I never allowed to exist because they didn't fit neatly into a respectable future. The risks I never took because they couldn't be justified in advance. I didn't miss a specific outcome. I missed possibility. And the hardest part was realizing how much time had passed while I was busy being reasonable. Time doesn't announce itself when it's leaving. It just goes. I started noticing how often I told myself it's too late, not because it was true, but because it was convenient. Saying it was too late meant I didn't have to decide. It gave me an excuse to stay still while pretending I was being realistic. But realism had become another form of fear. I reached a point where I couldn't avoid the moral dilemma anymore. Do you continue living a life that functions, that looks correct, that doesn't hurt anyone, even if it slowly drains all sense of meaning from you? Or do you disrupt everything, knowing that you might fail, regret it, or discover that the life you imagined is no longer possible? Staying felt responsible. Leaving felt selfish. And yet, staying began to feel dishonest. I noticed resentment creeping in, quiet resentment toward people who lived more freely, who made choices without explaining them, who seemed willing to risk instability for authenticity. I told myself I didn't envy them. But I did. Not their outcomes. Their courage. I realized how deeply I feared choosing something that couldn't be defended logically. I feared wanting something just because I wanted it. I feared making a decision that wouldn't look good in retrospect. I had been living my life as if it were a report someone else would grade. That's when the pressure began. Not external pressure. Internal pressure. The pressure of knowing that if I kept going like this, nothing catastrophic would happen, and that was exactly the problem. My life would remain intact, respectable, and quietly empty. No explosion. Just erosion. I understood then that there are two kinds of regret. The regret of choosing wrong. And the regret of never choosing at all. I had spent years avoiding the first, and accumulated the second. Once that thought took hold, the comfort of my life started to feel fragile. Every routine reminded me that I was maintaining something I didn't fully believe in. Every familiar moment carried a quiet accusation. You're still here because it's easier. And ease, I realized, had cost me more than struggle ever could. I didn't know what I wanted yet. But I knew this: if I didn't choose something soon, time would finish choosing for me. And that choice would not be kind. The choice didn't arrive as clarity. It arrived as exhaustion. One night, lying awake, I realized I was tired in a way sleep couldn't touch. Not burned out. Not overwhelmed. Just deeply, quietly tired of maintaining a life I didn't believe in anymore. That's when I understood something unsettling. I wasn't afraid of change. I was afraid of admitting that staying had already cost me more than leaving ever could. So I stopped waiting for certainty. I didn't quit everything. I didn't blow my life up. I didn't announce a transformation. I simply stopped pretending that inertia was loyalty. The first decision I made felt almost insignificant from the outside. A small redirection. A refusal to continue something that drained me. A yes to something that made no sense on paper. My body reacted immediately: tension, doubt, the familiar instinct to undo it. I waited for regret to hit. It didn't. What I felt instead was fear mixed with something I hadn't felt in years. Engagement. For the first time in a long while, my choice had weight. It mattered because it was mine, not because it was approved. That didn't erase the past. In fact, it made the past louder. Once I stepped out of autopilot, I could see how much time I had lost. How many days I had lived as a version of myself designed to function, not to feel. How often I had chosen what looked right over what felt true. There were moments when that realization hurt more than staying ever had. Regret is sharp when you finally stop numbing it. I grieved then, not dramatically, but honestly. I grieved the years I spent assembling a life instead of inhabiting one. I grieved the person I might have been if I had trusted myself sooner. I didn't try to rewrite that history. I let it hurt. Because pain acknowledged is lighter than pain avoided. As I continued choosing differently, I learned something that surprised me. The world didn't collapse. Some people were confused. Some relationships changed shape. A few quietly fell away. That hurt. But staying would have hurt more. I saw clearly that some connections only exist because you don't challenge them. Some roles only work when you keep playing them. Some lives remain intact only if you remain absent. Letting that go felt like loss. But it also felt like honesty. I stopped explaining myself as much. I stopped justifying every decision. I stopped asking whether my choices were reasonable and started asking whether they were mine. That question became my compass. Not is this smart? Not will this look good later? But can I live with myself if I don't do this? That question doesn't offer comfort. It offers direction. Slowly, my days changed texture. They became uneven, unpredictable, sometimes uncomfortable. But they stopped blurring together. I could remember them because I was present for them. I felt fear more often. I also felt alive more often. I learned that certainty is not a prerequisite for change, it's a reward that comes after movement. That confidence isn't something you wait for, it's something you build by surviving your own choices. I didn't become someone else. I became audible to myself again. If you're listening to this and you feel trapped inside a life that works but doesn't feel chosen, I want you to hear this without pressure or romance. You don't need a dramatic reason to change. You don't need permission. You don't need a perfect plan. You don't need to hate your life to admit it isn't yours. You only need to stop confusing endurance with meaning. I built a life I didn't choose. And one day, I woke up inside it. I can't reclaim the time I spent living by default. But I can refuse to spend the rest of my life the same way. Choosing late didn't save me from regret. It taught me how much staying had already cost. And now, even when the path is unclear, even when I doubt myself, even when the future feels unfinished, I know this: I am no longer living by accident. I am here because I chose to be. And for the first time, that choice feels like a beginning.